Hello and welcome to the Diegetic Advancement Podcast. I'm Riley, and today is a feedback episode. I'm just going to keep this on the podcast. I don't want to transcribe audio call-ins to the blog. And I've used Daniel's feedback in the blog already, so I think I'm going to stick with this kind of format. Most of the stuff is going to be on the blog and the podcast, but where a post or a recording kind of favors one of the mediums, I might just keep it on that. So, I released sort of a showcase for the Bolt Action Army, lots of photos, not great listening, so that's just on the blog, and in this case, listening to a bunch of audio is just going to be on the podcast. So, without further ado and ramblings, I've got a call from Evil Jeff, a couple of calls from Daniel, and I wanted to talk about a show from Joe over at Dekahedron, Evil Jeff from the Minions and Musings podcast, Daniel from Bandits. So take it away, Evil Jeff.
Riley, it's Evil Jeff. Hey, I've just been blazing through your back catalog there of all of your episodes. Great content. I really like the one role character creation that you came up with. It spawned a couple ideas of some stuff that I was looking at doing, ways of maybe enhancing upcoming game that I was looking for. So yeah, really great content there. I see that you're moving over to the blog, so I'll definitely put that on my list of websites to keep up with. Every time you put something new out there, go out and read it. Appreciate all that you're doing. Later.
Hey, Evil Jeff. Thank you so much for listening, and glad you're enjoying the back catalogue of the content. Can't believe I not called into your show previously, and now I have, so I feel good about that. The one role character gen was a little ways back, so I'm trying to remember exactly how I presented that, but I believe the idea was to use differences in dice such that if you were to achieve a high result in one stat, you would get a low result in another, or you get averages and things like that, just to kind of give balanced characters. You still get ranges of possibilities so that you can have those high stats, but one character should be equivalent to another-ish from memory. So I'm glad you found that interesting and potentially useful. Moving to the blog, obviously I'm doing both blog and podcast, but I really do need to get an RSS feed sorted for the blog so that it's a little bit easier for people to follow and keep up with, but I appreciate you checking it out. Evil Jeff is the host of the Minions and Musings podcast. Just put out a good episode on agency and railroading. I think across the two episodes, it came to a satisfying conclusion there. So definitely recommend you checking that out, along with everything else they do. All right, thank you very much for the call. On to a call from Daniel Norton.
Riley, it's Daniel from Bandits. Keep calling in. I have been somewhat on a hiatus myself, both from listening to podcasts and from recording podcasts, although I've been doing my YouTube channel. And jumped back in to see that you've kind of reset and started over with the blog combo idea, which I really like, actually. I was thinking the same thing. I feel like this time of year, I always think about blogging for some reason. I think that's because when I was Dungeon 23, I kind of was using my blog for that, and it got me into like blogging, I guess, every day on some level. Well, I think I did it once a week, but I made notes for myself every day, and then I blogged once a week. Anyways, enough about me. I'm pretty excited to see what you do. I was really enjoying the 6 turns in the dungeon thing, so I don't know if you'll bring that back in any way, shape, or form, but that was really cool. I just wanted to comment on that because I don't think I ever called in to say that. But glad to hear you back on the mic. I'm not sure how long you were gone because, like I say, I haven't listened to podcasts in a couple of months, maybe 3 months now. I started a new job, but I'm settled into it and getting back into the podcasting vibe, so I will hopefully be listening and calling in more often. So keep up the good work. Talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for the call, Daniel. I've actually got a second call. I thought I'd just jump in here, though. Blogging, podcasting. I find it is much easier to write, and I find it easier to find time to write and then record. It's an easier sort of process, but it's much easier for me to listen to podcasts. So, I'm enjoying doing it so far. Still need to get into a bit of a rhythm, as you said. I think, something like Dungeon 23, where you get into that habit of writing daily. Trying to think about how to structure my time such that I am doing that. And managing time between, work, family, and then all my other hobbies, things that I do. Still wrapping my head around that, but I will come to a conclusion on that, hopefully. 6 Turns Down Under. Definitely plan is to continue that series, both just recording me actually playing through and kind of exploring the game via that. But I'm trying to, one of the goals that I wanted to do with this revival of the podcast was actually put out some something useful rather than just my ramblings. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around how to put something out, some product out for that, free. I'm not trying to make any money. It'd be nice to put something out that people can use. A couple of ideas. One is sort of a solo play product, right? So you go through the systems where you're rolling on tables to generate dungeons, right? It's kind of like what I'm doing with the recordings of the solo play, but instead of but structuring it like instructions of a mapper. I'd really like maybe some like duet play, right? Because it's one thing to be able to take in the instructions of a mapper, of a GM, and then map them. But I think one of the other parts is, the other difficult part is being the GM and looking at a map and translating that into instructions, right? But I don't think you can do that solo. Except if my other idea I can put together, which is sort of like a Wordle, but for dungeon maps. So effectively, what you would do is, I would you would get a set of instructions and a little app to draw, right? And then it'd work out if you've got it correct. I think that could be interesting as a little one fun programming exercise for myself, but as a little tool as well. Again, I don't know how to exactly how to translate that such that you are looking at a map and translating into instructions, other than the dreaded AI word. Perhaps some sort of multiplayer system where actually that's a good idea. This is why I like the podcast and feedback, especially when I just kind of freeform talk. If you could sign up, you'd actually transmit instructions. So it's sort of two modes. The one that I described before, you get instructions and you try and draw a map. But you could also sign up to look at a map, transcribe instructions, which then would get sent to another random user. And you would, once they've completed that task, you would get back, hey, where did it all go wrong? So I've been talking about that for way too long. So let's put a cap on it there. Congratulations on the new job. Glad that you are settled in. Anyway, let's jump on to your second call, which I did sort of base my previous episode on game completeness on some of the feedback here, but let's jump into it for real this time.
Hey Riley, Daniel calling in again. I don't know if they'll be back-to-back as far as when you get them, but I'm calling back-to-back. So I just started listening to episode 2 because I found myself with some time, and you're talking about completeness, which I think is super interesting. I really would love to hear you dig into this a bit more, and I'm going to agree with you. I bought Shadow Dark, the PDFs anyways, and with the intention of probably being a player in a game, but then that never came to be. The mechanics look fine, right? And the things that people jump on are, the torch timer, all that kind of stuff, and the way the skills work. But, right, it never occurred to me, because I didn't actually sit down to play it, that it didn't have these elements that you're talking about. And that right there is super interesting, because I think even if you don't have tons of tables and charts and things like that, I feel like you should at least have some information as to what you think the kind of adventure that would be appropriate for the game should be. Now, I know that some people don't care about this. I know that Todd over at Hexpress, I can't remember who he was talking about. It's very specifically, there's a reviewer that says they don't care what the original intent was. But I do. I mean, I want to know, like, if when you create a game, especially a game that's so similar to other games, what is different about this besides the mechanics? What is the world like? What is the adventures like? What is it like to adventure in this? And you don't need a world. I think that might be too much. I'm actually bouncing up against that with Crown and Skull right now. Crown and Skull seems super awesome, but like 2/3 of the book, roughly, I'm probably exaggerating there, is the location, the world, and it's awesome. But it's like, because so much of it is the world, it makes me feel like I need to play that world, which for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of because I'm not great at memorizing worlds, and that's why I don't love playing in, any of the Dark Sun, Forbidden Lands, no, Forgotten Realms, whatever the D&D ones are, Greyhawk. I never like to play in those because I want to make up my own lore. So, I mean, part of that is just me. So I don't want a world necessarily, but I do like an idea. I like a feeling. I like a concept of what we're supposed to be doing. It doesn't have to be a lot. If we look at something like Into the Odd, I feel like Into the Odd, of course, now I got to look back and see what they actually have in there. But I feel like Into the Odd does kind of explain to you what you should be doing, give you an idea. And part of that, too, is even in the original Into the Odd that I have, that's a skinny little book, there's like a little starter adventure. So you can actually go through this thing. So I don't remember Shadow Duck having a starter adventure in it. Maybe it does. But I feel like even that helps. So if it has that, at least I can give it a little bit of leeway, not Shadow Duck, but games in general. But I do feel like, yes, there should be some kind of either a few chapters of GM notes on how to create an adventure, even if it doesn't have tables and charts and stuff, or a very classically BX style, which is my favorite way, system to create that you can use at least as a baseline. Like, this is how you create an adventure for this. Boom, you have this, it's a dungeon. It has, this create a concept, set the monsters, put the treasure, whatever it is, right? And give you an example. I feel like that's super important in order to make a game work for me long term if I want to really dig into it. And forget about me. I'm new players, right? Like you said, you've got lots of experience running games. You can use stuff from BX, but what if you jump on the bandwagon of a game that's blowing up and you buy it and you haven't played too many RPGs before and you sit down and you look at it and you go, cool, what do I do? I think it forces you into the idea that you have to buy their adventures, which I don't think for 1 second that's what they were planning or trying to do here. But it does kind of put you there where you're like, well, what am I going to do now? So I'm sure Dolmenwood, based on the Wormwood zines that I had in the past, probably has tons of that stuff in it. Plus, it is, as far as I understand, it's still based pretty much on BX. So that game probably is very complete. So I'd be curious what you think about Dolmenwood. I didn't back it because, again, I don't want to necessarily play in somebody else's world, but it does seem pretty interesting. Anyways, I'll listen to the rest of it. You were talking about Hobgoblin, and you got me intrigued by it, so I'll listen to the rest of the podcast and may or may not call back in, but talk to you soon.
Okay, and thank you for the second call, Daniel. I've covered most of the contents of this in my previous episode, but I just wanted to play it so that you can hear Daniel's actual thoughts rather than just the little bits that I chopped out and then filtered through my own words to you. So there it is. A couple of things that kind of stuck out to me on a second go through. Into the Odd doesn't have the same kind of procedures for like treasure placement and things like that that say BX does. But interesting, which is kind of the crux of some of the issues I had with Shadow Dark, was the XP system for Into the Odd is you just need to complete a number of adventures. So it doesn't really matter if there's treasure or challenges, right? And it doesn't really matter exactly how the players overcome them, other than that they do. Whereas in BX, with it tied to gold, you do kind of need to think about that a little bit more carefully. And so the advice for how to think about that is certainly useful. On Dolmenwood, I'm probably going to slowly share my thoughts on the product as I share updates from my actual sessions running it. But it'll probably culminate in some sort of larger review piece. I need to think of a better word for review because it's certainly not qualified, but sharing my thoughts on it. Lastly, Hobgoblin, I might do some follow-up to that one. There was an issue with my order. Took some time to get the full PDF, and I've kind of now skimmed through that, and there's some great content in the full version rather than just the quick start that I looked at. The setting is really cool, and there's some of the missing details from the quick start, like magic and things like that. And there's some pretty good suggestions, I think, on things like setting up terrain and scenarios and things like that. So I'll probably dive into that kind of chunk of it at some point because, I found it interesting, at least to skim. Tangentially related to this call, and RPG completeness, Joe at the Dekahedron Podcast put out an episode semi-inspired by that original podcast, talking about his preferences, and I think it's titled Minimum Viable TTRPG or something like that. Really interesting. Go and give that a listen. The links to Minions and Musings and Daniel Norton's Bandits Keep stuff will be in the show notes, as will this podcast, the Dekahedron Podcast. It does highlight there's differences in opinion. What you need for a game to be complete is semi-personal preference, right? I think Joe is a really creative guy, really likes to get into world building, right? So he kind of needs less than what I perhaps do. Right, so go over and listen to that. Obviously, there's differences in Daniel's take than my own as well, but Joe's, I think, highlights that pretty well. And I called in, and I'm trying to think if there's anything worth sharing here that I kind of elucidated in my thoughts there. I think one point that I found was that, as I mentioned, Joe's, I think, really enjoys the world building. Sorry, Joe, if I'm miscategorizing you, but it's kind of just my opinion, my view of you from listening to your show, is that you really enjoy that. It's what you're good at. So you don't want stuff because it kind of is less useful for you. And I think, as you said, it kind of gets in the way and it's wasted space. For me, I find it a really useful groundwork to work on. One, I can use it and just run it as is, but if I want to do something different, I find it quite useful. I also find that it is very, what's the right word? It's insightful. The designer's thoughts and their, including things like design notes, but the setting and the procedures tell you a lot about the type of game. And if it's not the type of game that you want to run, sure, you can change everything, but there's probably another game out there, a better game out there for you. So it's kind of useful as a gauge for how would I use this system best? When would I use it? When would I use a different system as well? And the example that I kind of gave in the call was Monopoly. I think by some definitions, Monopoly is a complete TTRPG. It's not, but obviously, it has resolution mechanics. You roll dice, you move, and these things happen when you land on specific spots. Why it's not a TTRPG is it doesn't have an openness to it. It's all closed, but it has character creation. You pick your favorite mini from the box, and has a setting, right, which is pretty cool. If it didn't have the setting, though, could you play Monopoly? Yes, you could create your own board, but if you didn't know what a board looked like, because there's no setting in them, there's no board, it doesn't tell you where, no way it doesn't tell you how to create a board. There's no procedure for that. I would find it very difficult. However, with the board, I could ignore it and make my own board, and I think I'd have a much easier time creating my own board because I knew what the board was supposed to look like. Maybe that limits my creativity. It gives me biases to stick close to the source material, but I think my end product would be more likely to work with the other game systems, right? And I think you could release Monopoly without a board, but procedures for creating your own, which would be kind of interesting. Maybe that's another podcast episode. Anyway, I've dragged this show on way too long. Feedback is always my longest shows, even though I've only got 3 calls from 2 people. It's not a ton. I talk for a long time. So I will leave it there. As I said, all the links for Evil Jeff's, Daniel's, and Joe's shows will be in the show notes, as will be the ways for that you can get in contact with me if you'd like to share your own feedback. But thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.